Now at 12:30, it's time to join the ITN studios in London for a report on the major news stories of the day so far.
The news at 12:30 with Julia Somerville.
Royal Navy minesweepers arrive in Gulf war zone. Prime Minister calls TV chiefs to Downing Street. Cabinet split over how to reform the schools. Doctors say we can save cancer children, but we need more money. Good afternoon. As the tanker war between Iran and Iraq hots up again, the 4 Royal Navy mine hunters sent to protect British shipping have arrived at the entrance to the Gulf. Over the weekend, the Iraqis hit a Cypriot vessel carrying Iranian oil. The Iranians attacked a Saudi Arabian ship, and Iraqi jets carried out a raid against an Iranian supertanker. No details of damage or casualties are known, but with further retaliation expected, the mine hunters Herworth, Bicester, Brocklesby and Brecon have been sighted off Fujairah at the end of their 5-week, 6,500-mile journey from Rosyth.
In the 5 weeks it's taken the British ships to get here, Gulf mines have dropped out of sight, but they are certainly not out of mind. The small flotilla of Royal Naval mine hunters are packed with sophisticated means of detecting and destroying any type of mine. And within hours of arriving off the Emirates coast, the crews prepared for action. First, setting up the trailing gear that will be dragged behind the ships when they begin sweeping operations. Britain's naval contribution to Gulf security is now the 3rd largest behind the Americans and Russians. Moving towards the Gulf under the protection of HMS Andromeda, the 4 mine hunters are affectionately referred to by the Navy as their little sisters. But with their weapons uprated, the ships do have teeth, one gun team having taken the trouble to illustrate the point. Also for defense, the ships are sometimes covered with radar-absorbent tiles which make them less visible. Melting temperatures, they've soon discovered, is a common enemy, but the crews are bearing up well to it. The navies of Western allies have found no mines for more than a month, but the very presence of another mine-hunting force will be enough to reassure shipping that the international community's promise to make the Gulf a safer place remains intact. Britain's deeper naval commitment followed the discovery of mines outside the Gulf last month, one of which killed a British skipper aboard a supply ship. The Royal Navy's arrival welcomed now by merchant seamen.
Anything that can be done to remove the threat of a mine, which is something you can't normally guard against, can only be to the benefit of everybody concerned, of all nationalities.
Although the mines threat has receded, no one can say for how long. What's different now, though, is that with more minesweepers from Europe on the way, the risks to shipping if new mines were relaid would be less. Brent Sadler, ITN in the Gulf.
The overtime ban by members of the National Union of Mine Workers began this morning, the first time the union has taken widespread industrial action since the year-long pit strike ended in March 1985. The ban's been called in protest at British Coal's new disciplinary code. It won't affect maintenance or safety work, and the management say it'll take some time before its impact on the industry is felt. NUM leaders in Durham announced this morning that they'll be calling on the National Executive to toughen up the industrial action. Yorkshire NUM leaders meet tomorrow to consider a similar move.
Yorkshire's militant miners have given enthusiastic backing to the overtime ban, but they're under intense pressure from the union's leadership to step up their action by refusing to do safety and maintenance work in overtime to disrupt output.
Whatever Mr. Skagel says, thinks it should be overtime on, that's as far as I'm concerned.
What sort of action would you favour?
Well, 100% overtime ban. Full safety work out and lot.
As it stands now, I think it's a good idea. Sometimes you've got to put a fight up sometime.
I want to pull them out all together. Full strike.
The result of the ballot in Yorkshire will be known within 2 weeks. But British Coal has repeatedly warned that loss-making pits could be threatened by tougher action. They say 6 pits in the North Yorkshire area are losing up to £70 per tonne of coal mined. By intensive lobbying, British Coal hopes to dissuade Yorkshire's 34,000 miners from escalating their action. The dilemma for Yorkshire's miners is that the flexible overtime ban is having so little effect on coal production, British Coal could tolerate it indefinitely. Meanwhile, the men will lose money and the union could lose members to the rival UDM in Nottinghamshire. Mark Webster, ITN, Yorkshire.
It was work as usual in the Nottinghamshire area this morning. Most miners here are in the rival Union of Democratic Mine Workers, which split from the NUM during the coal strike. They're not objecting to the disciplinary code. There is a minority of NUM members, and they intend to abide by the overtime ban, but in practice, few of them actually work overtime hours. The UDM men view the overtime ban with scepticism.
Same as last time, ridiculous.
Why's that?
Can't afford losing money, can you?
You think it's going to achieve anything?
No, it never done that yet, has it?
The Nottinghamshire area is the most profitable in the country, producing a fifth of the nation's coal. Last year it made an operating profit of £73 million. Notts miners have traditionally been loath to take industrial action. Now the UDM is claiming it's recruiting disillusioned NUM members who they say have decided to quit since Mr Scargill announced the overtime ban. John Draper, ITN, Nottinghamshire.
Television's top executives have been at Downing Street all morning telling the Prime Minister about their plans for the future of the industry. Sex and violence on the screen came high on the agenda, but this TV summit's also been looking at high-tech satellite programming, late-night television and the creation of new companies.
Although television violence is still very high on the political agenda, following Hungerford and the drama Sins, Number 10 was playing down that aspect of this morning's meeting. The Home Secretary has already said he wants a new watchdog with statutory powers to control sex and violence on the screens. Number 10 insists the meeting's mainly to discuss the implications of new technology. It's the broadcaster's last chance to influence Mrs Thatcher before a new broadcasting bill. Technology already exists for additional services like satellites. At Number 10, they're talking about the possibility of further terrestrial channels. Then there's the question of how the programmes are paid for, by advertising or by introducing pay-as-you-view subscription services. Pay-as-you-view is the government favourite. And what about the content of programmes? Is the law adequate to ensure standards on sex and violence and fair reporting? Professor Alan Peacock, whose report on BBC Financing recommend phasing out the licence fee and moving to pay-as-you-view, opened the meeting.
Professor, it seems that the government have...
Well, I think we're all going to put forward various ideas which the government will consider for the broadcasting bill. I can't be quite sure how this will be played because it's an informal seminar, it's not a formal procedure.
Number 10 insists this isn't a purely cosmetic exercise. The Home Secretary has reassured broadcasters that the Prime Minister doesn't believe all human wisdom lies with Whitehall and she will be prepared to listen. Certainly those talks, which have now been going on for nearly 3 hours, will have been crucial to the whole future of British broadcasting. Sarah Cullen, ITN, Downing Street.
A man of 27 has been remanded in custody for 48 hours, charged with murdering 2 Leicestershire schoolgirls, Linda Mann and Dawn Ashworth. A group of women outside Leicester Magistrates Court shouted and jeered as Colin Pitchfork left after the 5-minute hearing. The Education Secretary, Mr. Kenneth Baker, flies to the United States today to see if Britain has anything to learn from the American schools system. He leaves behind a growing row about the education bill to be debated in the next session of Parliament. Its main proposals are many schools to opt out of local authority control, no limit on the number of children admitted to any one school, a national curriculum with tests at the age of 7, 11, 14 and 16. Today, the radical right-wing Hillgate group, highly regarded by Mrs Thatcher, has published a report saying our education system should be changed even more. They say independent schools should be able to get government money and children who fail national exams should repeat a year's schooling.
This morning, government sources have been working hard to deny that there's any split between the Education Secretary and the Prime Minister, and before he left for the States, Mr Baker was making the point himself.
All the proposals that we're putting forward on education reform, which are very extensive indeed, have been thrashed out by consultation with a whole range of Cabinet colleagues, of course involving the Prime Minister. She's very interested in this, as she is with all the other major areas of reform we're taking through. And indeed, there would be no chance of us, me taking these measures through, unless the Prime Minister and I saw eye to eye.
But it's been quite clear ever since that famous election press conference on education that the Prime Minister and Mr Baker do put a rather different emphasis on education reform. Mrs Thatcher has never hidden her admiration for the old direct grant grammar schools, but Mr Baker has said from the start that the opt-out schools would not necessarily become grammar schools.
Don't think for just one moment that schools will automatically want to become grammar schools. Schools may want to become technological schools, they may want to become vocational schools. After all, people choose schools for a whole variety of reasons.
There are other differences of emphasis between Mr. Baker and Mrs. Thatcher. She rather keener, for example, on simple tests against the new national curriculum. He thinking more of a fuller assessment, including the tests. But that, say Whitehall officials, is to be expected while the proposals are at the consultation stage before the new bill is actually drafted.
Well, with me in the studio now are Labour's education spokesman Jack Straw and one of the members of the Hillgate group, Dr. John Marks. Dr. Marks, what exactly are the central proposals that are in your report?
Well, we think the government don't go far enough in their attempts to give more power to parents. As well as letting schools opt out of local authority control, we believe that new schools should be allowed to opt in to state funding, and that the government should do this by giving a direct grant to the parents, which they can use in an LEA school or a state school, or a direct grant school, or even in an independent school. We think that that will give to parents the right, which all parents, the right which the rich have always had, to choose the education which they think is better for their children, and that it will increase accountability and raise standards, as well as increasing the amounts of choice.
Jack Straw, what's wrong with parents being given a bigger say in what happens to their children in schools?
I'm in favour of parents being given the biggest say possible. I'm a parent myself, and I'm in my child's school almost every day. But someone has to hold the ring, has to ensure fairness between different schools and different children of different abilities. Now, I think Kenneth Baker recognises this somewhere, and that is why he's fighting the Prime Minister, and I'm afraid fighting Dr. Marks and the Hillgate group, who, if their proposals came about, would create a great deal of almost anarchy and certainly chaos within the school system. And if a large number of schools opted out of local authority control, as Mrs. Thatcher wants, Mr. Baker doesn't, if, say, 5,000 schools opted out of local authority control, that would be to establish a centralised state system. And many of the proposals from the right wing of the Tory party, which are sold on the basis they will increase parental choice, will do nothing of that kind but damage standards and reduce real choice in education.
But what about things like getting children to repeat a year if they've failed their exam? Dr. Marks, isn't this a recipe for more absenteeism and children playing truant?
No, I think it'll give them more incentive to get on and reach the standard they need to reach. It's the sort of thing which is done in other countries too. And it's successfully done in West Germany and France, for example, where the standards are often higher than are achieved by our 16-year-olds. As far as our proposal is not being fair, well, I think it'd be much fairer if every pupil had a certain amount of money which it took with them when they went to the school. To be fair, in the present system, where very often more money is spent on the schools which are failing than on the schools which are doing well per child.
Jack Straw, final response from you to that.
Well, the introduction of vouchers, which is what Dr. Marks talks about, would lead to fee paying, an end of over a century of free education. It is free education which has been the most important democratic right that we provided our population with, and it is that which the right wing of the Tory party wish to take away.
The voucher will cover the full cost of education.
I'm sorry, I must stop you there. Jack Straw, John Marks, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
The former head of a secret Italian Masonic lodge has given himself up to Swiss police after 4 years on the run, accused of political corruption. Licio Gelli led the P2 Masonic lodge, whose involvement in a bribery and tax evasion scandal toppled the Italian government. The Vatican Bank was also said to be involved. The question now is, will Gelli tell the full story and name names?
Licio Gelli had been on the run for 4 years. If he talks, there are likely to be politicians in Europe and Latin America wishing he'd stayed a fugitive. Even the Vatican has good reason to fear this arch-manipulator of others. In the early 70s, Gelli controlled the right-wing Masonic lodge, P2. The Brotherhood, as it was known, infiltrated the Italian government, the civil service, the army and the banks. The aim was to destabilize Italy and create the climate for an extreme right-wing government. The tactics were often violent. Gelli supported right-wing terrorists, responsible for bombings in Italy throughout the 70s. At home, he failed, but abroad, Gelli and P2 gave money, weapons and expertise to a string of military dictators in Latin America. General Galtieri, for example, the architect of the Falklands invasion, was one beneficiary. During the Falklands War, Gelli arranged arms shipments from Europe to the Argentine government. Yet it is at the Vatican that the news of Gelli's surrender will be greeted with most suspicion. Gelli and his Brotherhood helped run the Vatican Bank, and the scandal that engulfed the Pope's financial advisors has never been fully explained. In short, if he survives the illness that forced him to give himself up today, Licio Gelli could come back to haunt all those who once looked to him as the ultimate godfather, even by Italian standards.
Conservationists say 5 million people in Britain are getting dirty tap water, breaching the legal limits set up by the common market. and some of our waterways are now so contaminated that fish can't live in them. That's prompted some of Britain's 4 million anglers to join forces with the conservationists to launch a water charter. Volunteers are being asked to monitor river pollution and help clean them up.
8 years ago, you had to arrive early to cast your line on this stretch of the River Tame, the most popular for anglers around Aylesbury. Then the local sewage works was overloaded, the effluent deoxygenized and polluted the river with ammonia and destroyed the fish for 10 miles. Today, you only see the odd hopeless pleasure angler.
Have you caught anything today?
No. And the once full-time anglers hardly remembering when they last saw any sign of life in the river.
8 years since the works went wrong, the fish have disappeared completely.
And what's it done to the angling club?
Virtually destroyed it. 14 members now this year, where they had 200 or so in 1979.
The anglers took the Thames Water Authority to court for polluting the river with untreated sewage. A few weeks ago, the authority was fined £6,000 and pledged to clean up. Now, even the anglers are pleased with the efforts they're making, but it could take years to repair the damage.
Thames has given this problem the very highest priority it can, and we're planning to spend £160 million over the next 5 years. But even so, it will take 5-6 years or perhaps longer to overcome our present problem.
The case of the Aylesbury anglers might be the most celebrated protest against water pollution, but it's not exceptional. Old plant at sewage works and lack of investment is being blamed for pollution problems everywhere. The water authorities themselves admit that there are over 1,000 sewage works in Britain where pollution levels exceed the legal limits. Today, at a London press conference, conservationists and anglers joined forces to set up monitoring groups throughout Britain. And they warn it's not only fish that are suffering, but agricultural and industrial effluent are seeping through to Britain's drinking water, and we're all now threatened by Britain's deteriorating water standards.
Cancer consultants from 19 British centres say children may soon die because lack of health service funds is preventing provision of the best care. As their report is published, a Granada Television World in Action documentary to be screened tonight blames increasing pressure on the service.
The report by those treating children with cancer was given to the government 6 months ago. Doctors say that the 19 specialist centres in Britain are having to rely on charity to keep going. They're all understaffed. Most need 2/3 as many doctors and twice the number of nurses. Children like 5-year-old Jennifer Norman with stomach cancer need intensive and expensive treatment. The cost of saving Jennifer's life is estimated at £47,000. The report is not a direct attack on government funding. So successful are these centres that 50% of the 1,200 children who develop cancer each year now survive. Doctors want the Department of Health to recognise this branch of medicine as a regional specialty, to take over posts funded by research and charity, to develop special courses to train more nurses, and to provide proper in- and outpatient facilities.
With me now is Dr. Alan Craft of the Royal Infirmary in Newcastle. Dr. Craft, you're one of the people who wrote this report highlighting the problems, and you work in the front line up in your hospital in Newcastle. How bad is it? Are children actually dying at the moment because of lack of care?
No, children are not dying at the moment. We feel that if things aren't improved for them, the children may well die in the future. I mean, up until now, we've been able to provide the best available care for any child in this country. The best available care anywhere in the world could be given to children in this country. But the service has become under increasing pressure over the last few years, and it is getting to the stage where we may no longer be able to give the children the benefits of the most up-to-date care.
Are you able to say how long you think you've got?
It's very difficult. I think that the service continues to struggle along, mainly because of the goodwill of everyone who's running the service, both the nurses and the doctors and all others. But I think that the need is urgent to do something about it.
The cost is pretty tremendous. We heard in that report that just one child, the care for one child, is £47,000. That's an awful lot of money, isn't it, considering how many people are involved?
That may sound a lot of money, but in fact, if you think that that child is going to be cured of his cancer, or of her cancer, as in this particular case, that in fact is actually very cheap. It is less than £1,000 for every year of life that she will live from now on. And certainly in economic terms, we feel that the treatment of childhood cancer is actually very cost effective.
Obviously, you're in a queue of people, queue of doctors trying to tap a limited pool of money. Is there a sense in which, because you know you've got a very emotive case, you're hoping to get to the top of the queue?
No, we've very much underplayed that side of it. We're only too aware of the very emotive nature of children and cancer. And we have perhaps in the past been very reticent about pushing our case forward. And it's not really until the case has become obvious for other reasons that, in fact, that hospitals have run out of money and that people have looked to see where the money has all gone and it's actually gone to children's cancer, that they have, it has become obvious that this is what the problem is. We are not trying to jump the queue. We are trying to put forward the case that children's cancer services do need proper funding.
Dr. Craft, thank you very much for coming in and joining us. City News and the Mountleigh Property Group has at long last launched its bid for Sir Terence Conran's Storehouse Group, which runs Habitat, Mothercare, British Home Stores and the Richard Shops chain. On the stock market, trading has been slow and the 100 index is only up 2 points on the morning. The pound is down almost ½ cent against the dollar, and against a basket of currencies, it's unchanged. It's a far cry from Alaska, but the wide sands of Morecambe Bay are all proving to be essential training for Leslie Monk, who's preparing to meet the moose and the grizzlies of the Arctic. She's trying to become the first British woman to win the toughest husky dog sled race of them all, from Anchorage to Nome, more than 1,000 miles along the old Gold Rush Trail across glaciers and the frozen Yukon River.
Leslie Monk had always considered herself an ordinary sort of person until she took on a husky puppy 7 years ago. Her farmhouse in the Lancashire moors is now also home for 11 huskies. Leslie has become a sled dog racer, destined to become the first British woman to enter one of the most dangerous sporting events in the world. The homemade booties may look a little strange, but they'll be needed for the 1,115-mile race across the sharp ice of the tundra. Leslie faces the competition of 63 other racers in the hazardous trail in temperatures which can dip to 65 degrees below freezing. Today, it's exercise. 50 miles from home on the sands of Morecambe Bay. Next month, Leslie will be in Alaska for 5 months of practice.
Okay.
She was there last winter, living in a log cabin, training with one of the world's best long-distance sled dog racers, and covering more than 2,000 miles. Only one of these huskies will be flown out. Leslie has spent £10,000 on an Alaskan husky team. Her home teams say Leslie has the skill and bravery needed.
You can actually get attacked by moose along the trail.
I gather you're taking a fairly hefty gun with you there?
Yes, I'm taking a 44 Magnum revolver and a rifle, a 44 Magnum rifle as well. Hopefully I won't have to use it.
Andrew Simmons, ITN, Morecambe Bay.
I'll be back at the same time tomorrow. The next news from ITN is at 5:45. Good afternoon.
The title may be lace, but life for Lily is not sweetness and light. Join us after the local news.
Good afternoon, the lunchtime news for the North West. Police in Greater Manchester are investigating a third rape in 4 days. A woman leaving a nightclub was taken on a 20-minute drive by a man claiming to be a taxi driver. She was raped in a terraced house, then driven back to the Mars Platting area of the city and dumped near her home. And 2 men have appeared in court charged in connection with one of 2 rapes which occurred in the Stockport area. British Coal and the National Union of Mine Workers resumed their battle of words in the northwest this morning as miners began their overtime ban in protest against the new disciplinary code.
British Coal warned that the ban threatens pay packets and jobs. Local miners' leaders responded by saying there was no alternative to it after British Coal's refusal to take the issue to arbitration. And they described the code under which a miner can lose his job for an offence committed outside the industry as harsh and unjust.
If it drags on, the National Executive are on standby, and if the National Union, you have a 12-10 vote there that could be changed, if the overtime is escalated to a minimal overtime ban, yes, many will be sent home. But our #1 aim at this moment in time is to get the coalface workers and the development workers who are implementing the ban to affect British Coal's production and profits, to get them 5 days a week in.
Ferry passengers across the Mersey have again been hit today, and a new Belfast ferry could be sailing into an industrial dispute when she arrives in Liverpool tonight.
The St Colm ferry, which operates the daily service from Liverpool to Belfast, is being sold off and replaced with a bigger and faster ship. But the St Colm's crew fear the new St Patrick will make almost 150 sailors redundant. Management at Belfast Car Ferries are meeting union leaders today, but they've already denied there's job losses on the way. Meanwhile, commuters were again hit this morning by another lightning strike on the Mersey ferries. The Birkenhead and Seaforth routes were disrupted for 2 hours because of a long-running pay row, but normal services have now been resumed.
A man has gone on trial in Liverpool today, charged with the murder of Birkenhead florist Diane Sindel. 30-year-old Peter Sullivan of Queensbury Gardens, Birkenhead, made a brief appearance while legal submissions were made. The body of 21-year-old Diane from Cressington Avenue was found in an alleyway near Borough Road on August 22nd last year. An inquest has been opened into the death of Anne Winstanley, whose badly burnt body was found in a water-filled quarry at Eccleston near Chorley 2 weeks ago. But the hearing at Ormskirk heard it was impossible to say how she died. Her son, Michael, has been charged with the murder. Liverpool's 47 disqualified councillors today take a final decision on how to pay off their debts. They owe almost £400,000 in surcharge and legal fees.
It was back in March that the councillors were finally disqualified from office in a House of Lords ruling. The 47 meet tonight to decide if they will be able to afford the auditors £4,000 a month repayments over the next 6 years.
Well, at this stage we can't, because we've only got a limited amount of money at this stage, and if we give him £15,000 and £4,000 a month, we'd be able to do that for about a month, that's all. Then they'd have to take care of us. In the end, they most probably make us bankrupt, and all your possessions, anything you have, they'll take away.
Now some American football and bad luck Manchester All-Stars, who lost yesterday's Super Bowl, beaten by the London Ravens 40-23. See you later.